Hej, Anders Karler kommer fra Pionermøde.dk, og vi har glædet os rigtig meget til i dag, fordi vi synes faktisk, at AJ Plus leger med nogle grænser og nogle nye muligheder for nyhedsformidling til den yngre målgruppe. Og det er ikke sikkert, at de gør alt det, vi skal gøre, men de gør en god inspirationskilde. Og det er også en inspirationskilde, som har stor succes i det, de gør. Inde på Facebook, der har de 24 millioner brugere. De har 75% af deres brugere er mellem 18 og 34 år. Så de må gøre et eller andet rigtigt, der tiltaler den her målgruppe. Noget af det, de gør, det er, at de vælger nyheder med den seriøse ende, som interesserer målgruppen. De leger med nye videoformater, infografikker, quizzes, afstemninger og i en skøn blanding af alle de her ting. Så det er inspirerende at følge. Og vi er allerede selv lidt i gang her i huset, men det her kan måske også være med til at skubbe på, at vi afprøver det her område endnu mere. Og derfor har vi set meget frem til, at de kommer på besøg her. Så welcome to Jigar Mehta.
Great. I hope he said some nice things about me. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Welcome. It's great to be here. And just so you guys know, there are some seats in the front. You have to crane your neck, but there are some seats in the front. And I do this all the time at AJ Plus as well. So feel free to continue eating. If you have news or work you need to go to, come in and out. I'm very flexible with all that. Or stay. Maybe I'll partake some knowledge to everyone here. So again, my name is Jigar Mehta, and I'm actually the engagement lead at AJ Plus, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about exactly what an engagement lead does. But I think the things I wanted to talk to you guys about today is kind of how we think about the future of engagement. And I'm going to be drawing from kind of a couple of different roles that I've had, especially most recently at AJ Plus, but then some of my other operations I've worked with before. One great thing is AJ Plus is actually based in San Francisco, kind of in the heart of Silicon Valley. So we actually benefit a lot from being in the epicenter of a lot of great innovation that's coming out of California. So hopefully I will be able to partake some insights for you guys all, and whatnot. And we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end as well. So I thought I would start off with an image. I don't know if anyone knows what this image is of. Probably not. It's actually from San Francisco, and this is the day after the 1906 earthquake, which was kind of this one of the most horrific earthquakes for San Francisco as a city. And many people, after this moment, really thought this was the end of San Francisco. People left in droves. The city was really, it was all on fire, especially there was a great fire that kind of leveled the city as well. But there were a few leaders, or a few key people who said, actually, you know what, this is a time more than ever that we need to rebuild this city and actually build it better than it was before. And actually, 8 years later, or about 9 years later, they built the World's Fair, and they actually reconstructed this entire beautiful city, unlike anything that had ever been seen at that time in 1915. And it was this incredible kind of comeback story for the city. And I think why I like to sometimes start off conversations like this is, you know, especially in the States, and I'm sure here as well in Europe, you know, media feels like it's in a state of like, the earthquake has just hit, what is happening? Especially, you know, when it comes more with print journalism, especially feels this more than anything else. And we're starting to feel it more in broadcast, but also radio as well. I see it as a great opportunity, and it's so refreshing to see so many faces in the room that, you know, I feel like it's going to be us who are going to take this moment to really recreate what it means to be a journalism-based organization with our, you know, with an eye on building something great for our community, just like this story. Okay, here's the slide that kind of goes through a little bit about me, and I call it the logo check. So actually I got my start early on at the New York Times, where I was actually a video journalist producing videos for the New York Times website. And then I was fortunate enough to actually become a John S.K. Knight Fellow, which was really an opportunity to spend a year at Stanford. It's a great program, and they actually take 10 American fellows, and they actually take 10 international fellows. And I think there've actually been 1 or 2 from DR in the 50-year history, so you guys should apply as well. And it's really great. It's an opportunity to be at Stanford and kind of do whatever you want to do. For me, I spent my time at a place called the D School, which was actually focused on user-centered design. And for someone coming from media and spending a year in there, it really actually changed my kind of viewpoint on how I thought about creating content that was much more user-facing, which we call the audience, actually creating content that was going to empower an audience. So I took a lot of those lessons and actually created a project called 18 Days in Egypt. And 18 Days in Egypt was a collaborative documentary that really told the story of the Egyptian Revolution using social media that the participants who were in the revolution were creating in that moment to tell their own narrative history. And so I started really exploring this concept of storytelling using media fragments. Long story short, that was actually a short-lived startup that actually was based about 2 miles that way at the old Nokia building, part of an organization called Startup Bootcamp, which was actually started here in Copenhagen and now is in Berlin. So it's actually kind of nice to be back here after 5 years. Long story short, after that, I went back to the States and actually helped found a company called Matter Ventures. I was the first director of operations. And Matter Ventures was actually, is still in existence, and is a company that actually takes media entrepreneurs and invests in them through a for-profit model, and actually creates a startup accelerator around media-based startups. They're on their 5th class right now, and have had a few very successful projects come out of it. And then so that led me to working at AJ Plus, where I was able to kind of take a lot of the lessons of being user-centered and actually bring them back into a newsroom. So what's been really interesting, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this slide deck before, but every year Mary Meager, who is she's a partner at Climate Perkins, which is a big VC firm in the Valley, puts together a yearly presentation. But I actually pulled this slide from this year's presentation, and it's a really, and you can actually, if you just type in Mary Meager, you can Google and actually pull down this slide deck and look at it. It's about 200 slides, but it really looks at the state of media. What I found interesting about this, and I kind of tried to map it on my own career, was every time I started a new operation or a new venture or joined a new organization, there was always something else that was new, that was kind of like of the moment, right? So when I joined, I look back, and then when I joined the New York Times, Facebook was just coming into existence, but we didn't even think about it. I actually remember getting like a memo saying that about you shouldn't be on Facebook because you want to separate what you're doing here at the work and what you do in your personal time. It's very different now. I know you're probably being asked to be on Facebook all the time to promote your content, to engage with your audience. Anyway, so and obviously everything that's happening now. It's really interesting because you think about what's happening coming out now and how there's a moment happening, and how do you take advantage of it when you're building your own operations, your own content. That's something that's going to become quite normal and part of everyone's consumption in 2 to 3 to 4 years. And that's where AJ Plus is really interesting. I don't know if you guys have also seen this. This is called like the adoption curve. And it kind of, we go from, products go from being part of the right in the beginning, like the early innovators adopt them, and then you have more mass adopt them, and then you hit this point where it's actually enough people adopted that you hit a tipping point and it becomes kind of part of our everyday consumption. So, yeah. So the New York Times is definitely, on after the tipping point when they adopt technology, not always, and we'll get into some examples of that, but it's part of the late majority, I'd say. It kind of is the mass market. A lot of the work I was doing at Stanford was really exploring especially with 18 days, was definitely in the early adoption space, like kind of these new types of storytelling techniques. And then AJ Plus, and that's what I want to talk a little bit more about today, is really in this interesting space that we're trying to look at, new ways of storytelling and engagement with our audience that really is right before the tipping point, right before things that we think are going to become part of the landscape of our consumption and engagement strategies. Okay, so what is AJ Plus? Maybe I should show you guys a little video in case you haven't have come across it quite yet. Oh, so before I get into the video, I'm just fortunate to come here and talk to you, but AJ Plus is really built around these fantastic group of 80 to 90 young journalists, data scientists, reporters, animators, based in San Francisco and in Doha as well. And we took this photo in October when we were celebrating our 1 billionth view across all our platforms. And actually, when I was preparing the talk this weekend, I realized that we're at 1.5 billion views now. So it's really, they say the first billion's the hardest. So it's incredible to see, even in the last 2.5 months, we've doubled our previous, what took us 18 months to get to that first billion. Okay, little video about AJ Plus.
Empower.
Engage.
Defy.
My favorite word is engage. At AJ Plus, we don't just inform and tell you the news. We want to hear from you.
What we do does defy what a standard news organization usually does.
Everyone's got a reaction to ISIS. Brazil's become a major hotspot for surgical holidays.
Have you ever heard of WikiLeaks?
Ricky Lake.
What's the rate on AJ Plus?
It's new, it's fresh, it's the next generation of news.
What's exciting about the news today is being able to bring other voices into the conversation.
I know my rights. You got a gun pointed at me. I have not committed a crime.
Hearing back from people, I think, is important.
We tell stories in a unique way.
We want to hear about the stories that matter to you.
Great, so AJ Plus, we're actually a new digital channel from Al Jazeera, and we were really created with the concept of creating content that was going to engage with the connected generation. So we're actively, constantly thinking about this globally minded, connected young person today who's consuming our content, really creating this content that's going to make them feel more empowered, jump into a conversation, spark a conversation. So these are the things that we think about when we're creating our content. It's interesting to note that AJ Plus is its own entity. So we were actually created by the innovation department at Al Jazeera. So we're not connected to the Al Jazeera English or Al Jazeera America or Al Jazeera Turk or any other properties. They're like our cousins. And so we really think about, we have our own audience in mind. Then we're kind of hardcore about them when we think about creating our content. And again, so we have this fantastic, I think we actually have one of the most diverse newsrooms in America. Our staff is really representative of the audiences that we're also trying to engage with, which is kind of a very interesting thing that feeds back into our content. Just a little bit of the overall structure, just because I think it might help kind of frame how we think about AJ Plus, is we do have an editorial team, and that editorial team is not only focused on creating different types of video, and I'll show you examples of that. Everything from reactive, social, heavy video to contextual, kind of host-led pieces to our documentary unit and our satire unit. But the editorial department is also consisted of engagement. So it's consistent of the teams that are developing and distributing the content across all our social media platforms. And that's been really interesting. One of the changes that we've made is actually trying to think about social as editorial. The copy that goes around the post, the questions that we use to engage with our community, and then also the content that comes back from that back into our editorial. We also have an audience development team, and the audience development team again is kind of much more in the strategy mode. They're always looking for opportunities to kind of extend our content and find new ways to get it into new communities, but then also to think about how do we stay ahead of that. Remember on that curve, how do we kind of stay ahead of getting onto new platforms and new distribution methods before we hit the tipping point. We also have a data team, and the data team is actually critically important to us because we're really trying to learn, from all the data that's being created by our audience to actually look for new opportunities, but then also to understand how is our content actually going out into the world and what is being done with it. It's actually really important for us to know if we're actually making that impact, if we're actually getting people to spark conversations, so we're raising the level of discussion. And then we also have a platforms team. So we have a technology team that actually is building our own technologies, our own CMSs, our own methodologies for distributing our content. And that's becoming even more critical as we are distributing content that exists in other people's gardens. So if it wasn't clear yet, AJ Plus, we don't have a broadcast, we don't have a website, we don't have, we distribute content in native forms to the places our audiences are. And so for us, that's Instagram, that's Medium, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and then our own mobile devices. We have taken a mobile-first approach. Again, when we're thinking about the connected generation, they're connected on this device. So this is how they're consuming our content. Probably that's how they're consuming your content as well. I think it's one of the big shifts that we've seen kind of hit that tipping point in the last year is I think most publishers are now 50% mobile traffic. For us, we took a mobile-first approach. So I just want to show you a quick little video that talks about that.
What does a broadcast news organization look and feel like when it's no longer trying to just be broadcast?
We've reimagined the concept of the news story by breaking all of the conventions. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube, we have an app.
What you really want to do is take advantage of the mobile device.
The app is basically a glimpse into all the conversations that are going on, and they're organized by themes. Those themes are what we call stacks.
Sometimes they're video cards that are capturing the breaking news, sometimes it's the human element, sometimes it's the context, so that as you add new elements, new cards, new videos, etc., you can work with it.
The mission of AJ Plus is to give our younger audience a snapshot of what's going on in the world. We are bringing the audience into the fold.
We're first trying to figure out what it is that people are interested in, what they're talking about.
It's not about trying to read 2,000 words in one sitting, but keeping in touch with that issue over time.
We have stories from all over the world.
We have a core group of people who are here in San Francisco. We come in every morning and we scour the news and we try to figure out sort of what stories have risen to the top, what stories are important for the day.
We try and create a package, and that develops over time.
The future of news is no longer TV, it's online, it's in the social space, it's AJ Plus.
So for us, what's really important too is we don't value one platform over the other. We don't say that we are an app or we're a Facebook publisher. We actually, and this is actually a shift. Like early on, if I had come a year ago, I would have said a different sentence. And that's because what we started to realize, and I think this is actually important, is that the audiences that exist in different spaces are unique, and they are devoted to those spaces. If they're on Twitter, if they're on YouTube, if they're on the mobile app. And to start actually cultivate them as different audiences and find ways to connect them and to drive them from one place to another is important, but it's not critical. The critical thing is actually respecting them as authentic to that platform and actually building the content that's made for that platform. The other thing is, and I think this is also just interesting for a newsroom to know. Actually, how many of you guys work in the newsroom? Yeah. So we're not that different. We you come in the morning. There's a morning editorial meeting. Editors make decisions. They go out and they publish. They go out and they create content. Content gets fact checked, copy edited, and then gets distributed. So in that sense, I think what we've discovered is there's a lot that works that works in the newsroom environment, and we've just started to think a little bit more about being audience specific. So I talked about there's 3 different types of content that we create at AJ Plus, or 3 different kind of editorial strands. And I want to talk about the first one, which is real time. This is our strand that actually kind of looks at what's reactive, what's happening in the news, what's happening in the conversation space. And for us, that is the real building block for engagement. And what I mean by that is we've seen that the stories that resonate the most, that have the highest engagement on a day-to-day is what the community is talking about, right? So it's really being actively listening to what are the stories that matter to our audience, and then building those out into narratives. So I think what I do, I'll show you a variety of content that we've created in that space, just so you can see the range of content. So, and this is the content that's actually was made specifically for Facebook and Twitter in mind. That's kind of like its main outlet. So one thing that's interesting to think about in that space is we're not competing against the other 7 o'clock news for that same spot. We're actually competing against the rest of Facebook. And also, we're being complemented by the rest of Facebook. So all of a sudden, you might see a photo from your friend from this weekend, then you might see an AJ Plus story, and then you might see an article that was shared from The Guardian from somebody else. And so it's a very interesting and different space that I think we're starting to still understand. And one of the biggest changes we've seen, especially in this space, is that, at least for us in our audience, I'm sure you have seen some of the same, it's becoming even more so a news consumption environment. People are not going to Facebook for news, but when they're there, they're consuming news. And that number is even just going up and up and up. So for us as one of our primary destination platforms that we publish on, being Facebook, we've really, again, built on top of that emerging wave. All right, I thought you guys would enjoy this. Anyways, we'll watch the video. I'll give it away.
Sir, calm down. Everything will do. Are you injured? No.
All right, so a very simple video. And I think when we actually published it, it said, "Did NYPD just get schooled by Swedish cops?" And I think what's really important to do. It's A, the video is it's very interesting and kind of visual video, but B, it also with our audience, when we've done a lot of videos about social justice and police brutality, it was actually like showing the other side that you don't need to always have, in these situations, there are other ways to resolve them. And for us, the conversation, this video was published back in the same time that Baltimore was just on the brink of exploding, that it really hit a moment in the American zeitgeist. And so that combined with kind of the conversation around it, at the time, this was one of our most watched videos. But you can see what it was, and if we watch it again, one thing you notice also is that we really make videos, and this is that will really work without the audio turned on. And again, because when we think about most people consuming on this device, they're probably watching it without the headphones in. This was another video that's been very successful for us. And again, it takes dash cam video and actually starts to add the context around it to explain the situation. So this was a video that we actually had seen trending in Alabama, and we said, okay, we actually think this is a video that's going to resonate with our audience. And so, anyways, we'll just keep watching.
Jeg kom værdig på, hvad er det?
I worked so hard here, I'm totally devastated.
I sincerely apologize, Mr. Patel, Mr. Patel's family, and our community.
So for us, again, like a lot of places that we would see, we just take that original dash cam video and just put it out there. We really tried to add that context and really, pull in some of that social conversation that's happening as well. Also, you can see pulling in the crowdfunding elements as well. Trying to think a lot about how is our audience thinking about coming across stories like this and making sure that's reflected in the video content. This was actually a story that we actually started to follow as well. We've done other videos as the story developed. Okay. I know you guys are going to like this one. This is, these guys.
There should be a lot of systems beyond database.
Oh, I would certainly implement that.
Is there a difference between requiring Muslims to register and Jews?
If there's a rabid dog running around in the neighborhood, you're probably not going to assume something good about that dog.
Every one of you are terrorists. I don't care what you say. And I will do everything I can do to keep you from doing what you're doing.
Okay, so you can see at the end there we asked a question. So we really find there's a lot of value to, again, driving people into that conversation space and even starting to spark that conversation ourselves by actually asking that question. And if you see that you're seeing these videos not in their native environment, which is definitely on the social networks, you can actually see underneath the thousands to tens of thousands of comments are actually happening on the space, which is actually, for us, you can see the community starting to actually engage with themselves. One also thing that's important to note is you can see that AJ Plus really has a tone and style and voice, and that really resonates with the community that we're building the content with. And of course, politics still does really matter to them. I think there was some early assumption, or not early assumption, like many people go, oh well, serious stories or politics don't really matter to the younger generation. That we just flat out found that to be not the case. That it's actually about contextualizing it and actually about making them understand why it matters to them and kind of being able to connect the dots together. That's been really valuable. So let me just show you another piece that is, the other thing that we've actually noticed that works really well for us, especially in social and and more particularly on YouTube, is actually just raw content. Like actually, this is raw content from about a year ago from Mexico. We just saw protests kind of happening all over the country, and we actually tapped into our VJ networks to actually pull footage together and actually just published it raw. A clip like this, we saw almost 500,000 views on YouTube because people just wanted to actually see what was happening in that moment. So we really started to understand that part of the strategy for creating content for social is also not to get in the way all the time, to actually just say, here's what we're seeing on the ground, this is some raw footage, and then actually follow it up later with a piece of context to contextualize this scene. What's next here? Okay, so this was, and then sometimes, you just get a gift. This was a packaged piece from, I believe, AP or Reuters. And it was the same footage that was shot and then distributed to every partner. I'm sure you guys maybe did a story about this bridge in China that cracked. Let me just show you our version of it. Okay, the reason this is actually is I think it's the most watched video that we've ever produced. It's 65 million views on this one video. And what the crazy thing about it was, if I go back to that day, it was a story that we already had seen, we'd seen other people do it, and it was doing well. And so in the morning editorial meeting was like, no, we don't need to do that one. They've already, someone else has done it. It's just a packaged piece. But our audience development team was very insistent, they haven't actually captured what this, the moment, the reason that this could, is such an interesting video. And for us, it was about simply taking that first shot of the, of the guy walking across, leading with that, and then, asking, just kind of getting into that moment where we really thought people would want to share this video. We didn't realize it would do this successful as it did. And for us, it's really worth looking at and trying to deconstruct it because it was something that was available to everybody. Everybody had this footage, and everyone was doing something with the footage. But really, for us, it was came down to the edit, and then also just little things that we had actually spiced it up with, like the clip at the end of the woman shaking her head. These types of things we really felt would resonate with the audience and help them and make them want to share. Okay. So that just gives you a brief overview of one of our departments, which is called Real Time. Again, they're kind of the engine of growth. They're producing about 8 to 10 pieces a day. Really, again, looking at where the conversations are based on social and in the news and producing content based off of that. The second team that we have is called our context team, and they really look at contextualizing the news. We do, well, let me just show you a quick piece.
Just for some context, Yusa's been around since the 70s. That's when Argentina's spy agency helped the dictatorship track its own people.
Imagine being kidnapped. You're then flown to a black site run by the CIA.
Say hello to never buying a house. We're the millennials.
I just hope things might change for the better, but us, the people, really need to move forward and make that happen ourselves.
By 2050, several countries could disappear underwater.
The U.S. is no rookie when it comes to treating immigrants with hostility.
If I was a white dude for a day, I just kind of walk around and exist.
Un's been getting surgery on his ankles after hurting them back in July while wearing these. The rise of free trade and China's cheap labor force has made it the workshop of the world.
How can we accept a government that permits and perpetuates violence against its people?
But climate change is putting the brakes on food production.
Americans spent $28 billion on cocaine in 2010 alone.
I believe he was before his time.
With a population of 23 million, there are 55 firearms per 100 Yemenis.
The US spent $640 billion on weapons in 2013 alone.
Here's what the mainstream media isn't telling you.
So you can see it's a bit of a different style than our real-time production. It involves a lot more voice, a lot more heavy animation, really high-quality animation. And actually, it brings, of course, also voices into their pieces. So you saw a few pieces where we actually are talking to people that we think are in our community and actually saying, well, let's hear from you. So the mission statement for this department is really, again, to contextualize the news. Let's go to this next clip. So let me just show you another example of something that they had done in the last week. They're not as a reactive team, so because of animation and studio work and actually going into the field takes time. So they're looking at the thematic approaches and actually the bigger stories and trying to answer the questions that we think our audience is asking.
ISIS sees the world as black and white, the believers of the Islamic State and the non-believers everywhere else. In the middle, there's what ISIS has called the grey zone. These are societies where Muslims and non-Muslims live together around the world. But in its own online magazine, ISIS has talked about wanting to eliminate this grey zone. It wants these societies to become less tolerant, and for Muslims living in the grey zone to feel persecuted. So they face a choice, either stop being Muslim or leave to join the Islamic State.
Okay. 45 seconds. Quick piece. Okay, but I think one thing that people go, oh well, this type of stuff doesn't work on Facebook. This stuff, it's too long. It's 5 minutes. The attention is much shorter. It probably doesn't work on Facebook. Well, let me show you a piece that garnered over 25 million views on Facebook. And I'm just going to show you the first minute and a half.
No word strikes more fear into the heart of Fox News anchors. No 4 syllables shakes the 1% more to its core than socialism. The problem with socialism is...
Why would President Obama want America to be more socialist than capitalist?
43% of 18 to 29-year-olds think socialism is okay.
Socialism is a dirty word in American politics. It's lobbed at presidents to try and tear them down, and used by outsiders to set them apart. But what is it? Socialism is a political and economic theory of social organization that advocates the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. There are many different types of socialists, but the main idea is that the rich and the powerful don't get to call all the shots when it comes to the economy. But here's the thing that no one will tell you. America is already socialist. Here's why.
All right. See, that's a tease. We're not satisfied with 25 million anymore. But anyway, so I think what's interesting is, and it's a 4.5-minute piece, is, and the retention time for us was incredible on that piece, was, at least in the US, the conversation around Bernie Sanders, people are really looking at, and this happens every election year where topics start to resonate, and looking at the American government and its relationship with society is something that's really sparking a conversation around for young people, and so we said let's actually talk about maybe the 5 ways America already is socialist. Again, also not just like against the green screen and like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good animation, good production value, smart writing, good research, and that kind of all comes together to make a video that's very, very shareable with our audience. So a couple of more things I want to talk about is, again, we do a lot of high quality, much like you guys, we come from a broadcast mothership, and high quality really does matter. It's something that, for me, when I was at the New York Times, they would just say, here's a camera, go do it on your own. Just edit it your own, get it up on the website on your own, do everything on your own. To go into a place that's a broadcast company, it really shows you the value of actually high quality production as well into the storytelling. But that said, I think we've really seen a big benefit from actually creating content from this device. Like, this is how our audience consumes the content. Why not use it to create the content as well? So here's a little clip about our mobile journalism.
Мы сюда пришли для того, чтобы смотреть на то, как проходит протест в Америке.
Well, this is the biggest march to date. Thousands of marchers heading down to the historic courtyard here.
This has been a very popular home defense effort.
All right. First of all, last year was just a crazy year in terms of protest storytelling as well. I was reminded of that when we see, especially in the U.S. But it was really, I mean, the majority of that content you just saw was actually just shot on an iPhone. And for us, you know, having our reporters in the field shoot the content and then directly upload it to Twitter, where they're actually having a conversation with our audience, is a really powerful kind of system and feedback loop that our audience actually recognizes and picks up on. And for us as a mobile company, it actually is a fantastic way to work. We eliminated the satellite truck. You know, we have our teams who are shooting content there and then directly uploading it via Slack, which is our internal communication, to us in San Francisco. We pull it down, we edit it, and we put it back up on Facebook. So it's a really interesting kind of mindset to say, what does it mean to actually create content with this device as well? And again, we also think about it in just the raw format. So this is a clip. I'm going to just talk a little bit about it and just show it to you. This is from Baltimore. So again, all shot with an iPhone by our team, sent back to us. We did some light editing where we put the pieces together and published it on Facebook and Twitter. In this clip here, so that one clip of just do not give him a reason, call him Big Punisher, Big Pun, say the Big Punisher shirt on. We just took that and we just published that on its own on Twitter. And at that point, this was in April, again, Twitter video had just become, had launched and was becoming much more of a consumption device, or a consumption method for people on Twitter. Was at the time their most successful video clip of, I think it was consumed over 1 million or 2 million times. Something I had just launched, you know, maybe a month or two earlier. And so for us, we were really starting to see the value of taking the content and then also just publishing it in very different ways, like publishing in a mashed up clip setting, raw video for Facebook, taking a single clip, publishing it to Twitter, and then also taking that same clip and using it in a contextual piece that we produced the day or the next day as well. We also used it in you know, telling the night of the announcement of the grand jury in Baltimore. So again, this is the produced package, but what we were actually doing was also publishing in real time as well. A lot of the work that we've done since then, I haven't actually quite included it from this September with the refugee crisis, was we actually sent our team to walk with the refugees from Hungary to Austria to Germany. And we were actually, again, using the same device to actually live stream. So we were actually using Periscope and Facebook mentions to actually go on the journey with them. And we actually saw, again, with our audience, like they were consuming the content on this device in those spaces. And by using that same technology, it really did create a positive resonance with them. Okay, the other thing I want to talk about is, so we're not just like, you know, reactive. We're not just, you know, looking at what's happening in social and like, you know, taking it and making it. We actually are setting our own news agenda as well as a news organization. So we actually do thematic coverage as well. So this is one that we had done earlier in the year, trying to look, we wanted to actually, there were so many negative stories coming out of Africa, with Ebola, with corruption. We said, you know what, we want to really, well anyways, let me show you that.
When you see news about Africa, it's usually Ebola, displacement, or Boko Haram, right? But there's another side to the continent that doesn't get reported. We're going to help you hit the reset button on Africa. reset button on Africa?
So again, like creating a whole month of content about Africa for an American millennial, like, would it work? You know, we didn't care if it worked. Like, we're going to do it. But it did. And the reason it did was, you know, what we've noticed about the connected generation is they're hardwired to be solution oriented. So by telling stories of Africa that are future looking, that are actually looking at solutions to the problems, it really created a really engaged, active dialogue on our accounts around that content. It was, again, a positive story for us internally to say, you know what, we can actually create the news agenda by actually looking at stories and topics and going in depth on them. So in that time since, we've looked at a bunch of different stories. Let me just show you. Okay, so we spent a month looking at surveillance, which really matters to our audience. We've looked at the concept of being young and broke, looking at how this generation is getting by, looking at specifically issues of student debt. We focused on the water crisis, not just in the U.S., but globally, and are we running dry? We spent the whole month looking at the education system, and looking at not just how we're dealing with it, but how globally it's being addressed. Most recently, we actually did a whole month looking at immigration, but kind of the new face of immigration in America. And again, very reflective of the community that we have. And this month, we actually decided to go in depth into, we're calling matters of the mind, but looking at mental health and looking at everything that is happening around that topic for our audience. And we've seen that while these don't have the big views, as you would say, they're really important because they help actually distinguish us as a news organization against our competitors and really allow us to go in depth on topics that we really think matter to this community. They also have a fantastic long tail, so the content that we create will still work, and every time it comes back into the news, such as student debt, we're able to republish that content and actually bring in new audiences from it. I think the final thing I'll show you is the final part of AJ Plus is, so again, we do everything that's really reactive and kind of built off of the news or social conversations happening now. We try to contextualize the news, but then we also want to add that human element. We actually want to be able to go deeper and more personal. And so we have our own documentary unit as well that produces about 12-minute documentaries. So here's a sample.
We can't continue to roll things over white people.
White phosphorus is illegal under international law and was used against civilians and monks and strips.
Yeah, sure, you know that you gotta go, okay, let's look at this now.
Y'all are in the right headspace right now, but let me help you. We'll get there together because somebody gotta get us there. So let's get there.
It's no longer a question of if we will remain in the country forever. It's a matter of when we will have to leave.
So I think it's pretty incredible to see 68 films, 32 countries. We've worked with 53 filmmakers. And so you can start to see how AJ Plus is really a kind of a multi-armed operation, trying to find so many different ways to connect with our audience, with our content styles. I think one thing that's other important to note is everything that we do, this is kind of like the old method, how we, when I was in different organizations, or how we thought about it. There was a team that produced and reported the content, then you hand it off to a team that distributes the content, and then you have another team that would actually think about community and would manage the content after that's been out there. With AJ Plus, we actually just put it all together and just wrapped it all into engagement. Like, everything that we think about is always audience-facing. We always think about the audience from the time we pitch it, to the time we produce it, to the time we distribute it, to the time we manage it. And everyone is responsible for it at every step of the way in terms of engagement. And so we are actively always thinking about that, and when we're kind of developing our workflows, when we're thinking about the content that we're producing, we're always making sure that we're audience-facing. So that's been kind of like one of the best things about creating AJ Plus, was being able to create this kind of culture from the ground up. Again, I talked about data early on, and I think the important thing to note is just, this is really high level, just how we think about measuring, is we're not aiming for, like 1.5 billion views is great. Like, I'm not going to say no to that, but we don't use that as our measure. We're actually actively looking for engagement. And the engagement is what we're kind of optimizing our own workflows and kind of strategies around. And that's an internal metric that we've created for us that really resonates with our content. And so that we can actually sort of look at how content is underperforming or overperforming based on our own kind of systems that we've set up. We know that why we do that is if we can actually hit engagement, if we can actually get people to talk about our content and share our content, the reach and the likes will come as a result. And so we actually see that actively on our Facebook page. You know, this is from earlier today. You know, we have 1.8 million likes, but 3 million people are talking about AJ Plus, which is kind of an incredible. I mean, like, I don't know. Let's go to New York Times, because they're my old company. You can say that. Okay, they have 10 million likes, but only 2 million people are talking about them. So you can see the highest level, and this is actually good for them, 2 million. You can see that with a lot less, we actually have a lot more engagement happening, which is interesting for us. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through some of my trends that I think you guys should look out for. One is delightful experiences. I think, you know, when you're actually, you know, again, this is very much being user-focused and thinking about the user. And I think there's a big opportunity for us in the news and media space to create more delightful experiences. I think Google Now is kind of in that space. Mobile. This is another slide from that presentation. I think when you think of millennials and you don't think about mobile, you know, let's just call it a day. The crazy thing is actually, well, that first one's crazy too. My smartphone never leaves my side day or night. Agreed. 87%. This is in the US. I don't know what. I'm sure it's probably similar here. But 60%, you know, in the next 5 years, I believe everything will be done on a mobile. That's pretty astonishing. Subscription services, at least in the States, we're seeing a lot of this opportunity. Again, for us, we distribute entirely on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and other places. But, you know, more and more people are signing up for one of these various providers to build out their kind of news information / entertainment packages. And the cable companies people are not signing up for cable. So people are cutting the cord, but that doesn't mean they're not subscribing to content. The rise of short-form content, I think, you know, at least in the US, we have everything from the New York Times Op Docs, CNN Watch, Great Big Story. Watchable is actually a provider that's created by the cable company in the US, and then folks like us. We're really going to see the rise of much more short-form content. Crowdfunding is another one. I think it had to be a big moment a few years ago. This was crazy to me to see that over $2 billion have been pledged on Kickstarter, and almost 100,000 successful projects. You know, I had actually done the 18 Days in Egypt project I was talking about. We had done a Kickstarter. We were able to get 300 people to donate to the Kickstarter, and we raised $20,000. My friends had just done a Kickstarter last month, and they got almost 17,000 backers and almost raised $1 million. And they didn't even have to ask me for money, which was the craziest thing. And this is a film about Bill Nye, who's a television personality who a lot of people grew up with. So there's a lot of power in actually being able to find content and kind of celebrities and things that are going to resonate with this community to help kind of co-create that content as well. The rise of niche media, I feel this is another thing that's happening, more specialized sites. There's a nonprofit we work with called the Marshall Project that only is looking at the criminal justice system in the US. And so for us, being able to work with specialized providers is actually also something that I think is a trend that's going to be happening not only in the US but outside. I'm sure you're seeing some of that here as well. VR, I think there's a big moment that happened for us and remember I was saying New York Times is usually in the late adopter shape, but this time they actually beat AJ Plus on something. We have not done VR yet, but 2 Sundays ago they shipped out a million of the cardboards around the US. So there's more and more companies that are actually experimenting with VR, and I think it's actually something that in 2016 we're going to see a lot more adoption on, which is exciting. Vertical video, I think 27% of screen time is spent in a vertical space. So that's television, computers, and mobile. So 27% is spent on not this way, but on this way. So it's not worth, let's think about it. Archives, I think this is you guys are sitting on this incredible archive of all the television content and radio content that's been created in the last 50, 60 years. There's incredible value in there. We're starting to see, places like Facebook and other providers are now starting to show the value of our own archives back to us. I don't know, have you guys been seeing the feature where like this happened 8 years ago or 3 years ago, and it's actually being able to spark more conversations. So archives is something I would encourage you guys to be on the lookout for as a trend. More one-to-one distribution is happening. This is something that I think we're going to see much more of us in the news space dive into and start to really understand everything from WhatsApp to Snapchat to Instagram. And this is the reason it's important. It's just where the audience is. Like right now, the audiences are not just on Facebook and Twitter. They're actually starting to switch over to Snapchat. I can see them switching over to Instagram and to WhatsApp and whatnot. So it's something to be very mindful of as you're trying to kind of build a new relationship with a younger audience. You got to use the data. You got to use the data that's being created by your community to help you understand them and actually to make smarter decisions. So this is, for example, our Facebook data that actually showed us where we were building new communities and actually used that to help kind of drive our growth strategy. There's so much data that's actually being created that it's very good to be able to go on explorations to start to understand it. And I don't mean just on the biggest, largest scale. You can actually do this as an individual to actually look at how your stories are doing, to understand how your content is performing. And this is another trend that we're seeing in the US, and I think I don't quite know how it's going to shape up for news in media, but it's like an artisanal movement, the slow movement, the crafted movement. I think the way that we're starting to see it is people actually are much more willing to read 5,000 words, to spend 18 to 20 minutes on this device, and actually looking for those more personalized, really in-depth experiences, handcrafted experiences. So, to sum it all up, I think a lot of us used to think of media as a very simple equation, X plus Y equals Z, and where X was capturing the content, Y was how we're going to get the content out there, and Z was the community was going to not write angry letters to us. This is a lot more how I think about it is now. The equation is just explosive in terms of what needs to be solved. But the exciting place in there is that there's so much actually opportunity to find creative solutions to this massive equation. That will actually, in the end, and I think this is why it's important, it's going to allow us to actually develop a better, more authentic experience with our audience. And when that happens, it actually starts to create a better connection to them and for them to you. And in the end, that actually is going to matter the most in terms of our long-term sustainability. Okay, that was it.